Bem-vindos ao Type Theory for All podcast. This is episode number 5 and I'm your host, Pedro Abreu. In this episode, we hold a very interesting conversation with Yves Bertot to talk about the history behind his contribution with Pierre Castéran on writing Coq'Art, what's Yves' role in the Coq Team and how the team work and what are the sort of contribution they accept. Spoiler alert, they accept all sorts of contributions, especially donations if you're tied to a company, corporation, or institutions. This and much more coming up next in this episode. Let's get into it! Welcome everyone to one more episode of the Type Theory for All podcast. Today, Yves Bertot. Welcome, Yves.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I've been working in lockdown for the last few days, last few weeks, last few months. So it's a bit a special thing to have this kind of remote interview. But of course, we are more and more accustomed to using all these remote conversation tools. So I think it's going to be great.
Exactly. Thank you so much for coming. So you were actually in Paris, right?
No, I'm in the south of France.
Oh, okay.
The place where I work is next to the Mediterranean Sea.
Oh, sounds very nice. Well, okay, so let's start talking a little bit about you, about your career, about your academic history. I saw here in your website that you started your research working with Gilles Kahn. Sorry if I butchered his name. French is very hard.
The French pronunciation is Gilles Kahn.
Gilles Kahn.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, your path towards becoming who you are nowadays and working in area.
So when I was a kid, it was the beginning of selling computers to people like the Apple. And so it was basically a computer that used a Motorola small microprocessor that was, I think, the 6502, if my memory serves me right. And it happened that with my two brothers that had about the same age as I am, I have a twin brother and an older brother. With the three of us together, we pooled our money and we bought a small computer that was programmable using the basic language. So I studied mathematics and then I entered an engineering school. In that engineering school, I picked up the computer science courses. And I got into the dream of putting a real programming language, the one that I had found in this course, which was Lisp. I wanted to put some sort of Lisp on the computer. So that meant that somehow I needed to write the whole Lisp interpreter in 6502 assembly code and all that. So I wanted, my first thing was, I was actually in the engineering school, we were actually working with another big computer that was called a VAX from digital equipment. So the first thing I did was to emulate the 6502 on the VAX and to develop a development environment on the VAX machine so that I would not have to be working on the very small computer that I had at home with my parents. And this project never panned out, but I got very interested in semantics of programming languages, implementations of programming languages, implementations of programming environments. And that was basically the topic of research of Gilles Kahn. So we met, we arranged that I would do a PhD with him, and that's it. At the time I was in the Paris region, but Gilles Kahn was working in the south of France, so we arranged that I would join his team. So in his team, they were developing a system where they were basically using logic programming to describe the basics of the programming language that you wanted to define. So logic programming is a fancy name for Prolog. And so what we did actually was we showed how to develop an interpreter for an arbitrary programming language using Prolog. But to make it more appealing theory-wise, we actually did not say we were writing Prolog programs. We were writing semantic specifications, which is a big word for a Prolog program. But if you use only the pure part of Prolog, then the objects that you're manipulating, they have a very clean logical interpretation. There are implications with literals and things like that. And all the way it works is based on unification, which is also quite nice, quite easy to describe mathematically. So you have a very understandable setup in which you are describing a programming language. So the theoretical name for this was natural semantics, and the practical name for it was Prolog programs.
Why don't we use more Prolog nowadays? What happened here? Because you make it sound that it was a really good tool for you to develop the semantics of the languages you were developing and studying, right?
But that's not completely lost. It's still there. If you use Coq or any other higher order logic theorem prover, and you do an inductive definition, you're still basically defining a Prolog program. The main difference is that the Prolog program has a hardwired strategy on how to use the inductive definition constructors, which are the clauses of the Prolog program. But when you are using these inductive definition constructors in a theorem prover, you have the freedom of choosing the strategy that you're going to use. Well, in fact, a lot of time, you don't necessarily use an automatic search tool. You just do it by hand. You say, oh, now I'm going to use this rule. But if you want to do it automatically, then you just write a little tactic that is going to take all the constructors in order and try them one after the other using unification. And that's it. You have the same thing. You basically can emulate your Prolog interpreter inside a theorem prover. So I don't think I lost anything by moving from Prolog to Coq. In fact, I'm gaining because I can reason on these programs. And while before I could only execute them. So the kind of reasoning that we can do is, for example, to say that some specific programming language is deterministic. Whatever execution you do, the output is always going to be the same or something like that for a given set of inputs. So you can do this kind of proofs. And you can also show, for the same language, describe a typing methodology and an execution methodology and show that there's something that is often called subject reduction property in programming language courses. So I didn't lose anything by switching from Prolog to theorem proving. What I gained is that now I can reason on the semantic specifications that I wrote. So that was basically the research I did during the 90s. So I started my PhD thesis in 88, and between 88 and 91, I was only writing specifications and executing them in Prolog. Starting in 91, I wanted... There are two aspects of this programming environment that were at work here. One is we were possible to execute semantic specification. And the second aspect was we also devised a whole user interface for manipulating arbitrary programs in arbitrary languages. So we had a generic programming environment that was adaptable to various programming languages. A bit the same way that VS Code is now adaptable to a wide variety of programming languages. But one of the key aspects of this programming environment was that whenever you manipulated a program, it had to be manipulated as a tree. So you were not inserting characters in a buffer. You were manipulating trees. You had trees with holes. You were filling these holes with trees that were syntactically relevant in these places. So that was the way the user interface was designed. And because you were manipulating trees, you could do very fast all programs that you were manipulated were automatically beautified, because as a user you didn't have any control on the indentation. The indentation had been designed beforehand by the language implementer in the programming environment. So people might not like it, but basically that was the idea. And so around 91, there was somebody in my team whom I've always admired, and we're still in my team, is Laurent Théry. And Laurent Théry started to apply all these user interface tools to proof tools. So the proof tool he started with was the whole system, the one was developed by Mike Gordon. And so he did all these experiments, and I really thought what he was doing was really cool. So I thought, why don't we generalize this idea? And the same way as we are doing a generic programming environment, we should do a generic proof tool. And so I ported the ideas of Laurent Théry to Isabelle, the proof system that was devised by Larry Paulson.
Oh, so Isabelle was already a thing in 91?
Oh yeah, they had a version in 1992, I think. I finished my PhD in 1991, but at that time I had not done any proof. I was only writing semantic specifications, which is a beautiful name for Prolog programs. And so at the same time I was working on this user interface idea, I was also working on, okay, if we are using proof tools and we have these semantic specifications, we have to translate these semantic specifications into theorem prover input. So I could have decided to work with Isabelle, but for reasons that are a bit because it's easier to talk with people that are not too far and in contacts, I eventually moved to Coq. So I started to be working on two directions at the same time. One, which was do this description of programming languages in Coq, and the other one was use the programming environment, beautifying tools and all that to make a nice user interface for the theorem provers. So with Laurent Théry and Gilles Kahn, we wrote a paper in 1993 where we said real theorem provers deserve real user interfaces. This is a mouthful, but that was the exact title of the article. So if you want, you can go the paper. You can go and find it. It's somewhere. I'm sure Google knows how to find that. Okay, so that's 1993. After that, but you have to understand that when we wrote the specification of the programming language in this approach, it was always written as a big set, a big collection of inductive properties. It was not written as, it was not using any of the functional programming capabilities of the Coq system. We are only using the inductive property capabilities, which are stronger than the functional programming capabilities, because the functional programming language in Coq is not Turing complete. Or every program in the functional fragment of Coq is bound to terminate. But if you're using inductive properties, you can describe computational processes that are not bound to terminate. So this is what we were relying on. So we had an automatic tool to translate our semantic specifications into Coq inductive properties. And it had our semantic specification relied on a kind of typing system that was different from the ML or Coq approach, because it had type inclusion. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, but when we did the translation to Coq, that provoked that our presentations of language were a bit clumsy, because we had to add all the encoding to represent the type inclusion in a typing language that didn't have type inclusion. The typing system of ML or of Coq don't have this. So we had to add coercions, explicit coercions in many places to represent these type inclusions. Okay, so at that time in 1995, I already understood how to prove, well, I thought I understood how to proof correct a compiler using this approach. So I had a PhD student whose name is Ranan Fraher, and Ranan and we did a paper on proving an optimization It was a small example of what's something that would be in a compiler. So proving an optimization that was constant propagation in a very small language with only while loops. And so we published that in 1995. And so that in a way in the 90s I was already thinking of a dream that would be later realized by Xavier Leroy with a much better, a much more spectacular outcome, the Coq'Art compiler. But that I really believed it would be possible. So I tried some small first experiments about this. So let's go back. So this is my experiments on semantics of programming languages. So I was using proofs about semantics programming languages, something that would later be a big subject in the Popl community before Popl was interested in formal proofs. So when Popl got interested in formal proofs, I was already not publishing anymore on this topic. So
that's hard for me to even imagine, because since I'm very new here, Popl for me is all about, being formal and being formal by, proofs in the end of the day, right?
Yeah, but in the 90s it was not.
That's very interesting.
In the 90s, the language of Coq itself was the subject of Popl. I don't know, in fact, because I'm not, as I told you, I never published there. But, I think my experimental approach was to say, it will be possible to do the proof of a compiler one day. And this is what I published in 1995. And then maybe we'll come back to it later. So, but this is one leg of my research. The other leg of my research in the 90s was to push this idea that a generic programming environment where we are using tree structures as the main data is very useful to develop user interfaces for theorem provers. So I developed something that was called CTCoq. And the reason it was called CTCoq is because the generic programming environment that we were developing with Gilles Kahn was called Centaur. And CTCoq was short for Centaur applied to Coq. And so this was a system that was developed partly in Lisp, partly in Prolog, but we didn't use the Prolog part. And then it had socket communication with the Coq process. So this is what we do now with Prof General and our VS Code. We had a protocol to exchange trees. And then when we received the trees on the user interface side, because they were mathematical formulas, we also had a very nice two-dimensional display for these mathematical formulas. So if you want, I could dig up some paper where you see a very nice square root written in a 2D fashion, the same way as you would do with LaTeX or something like that. But that was produced on the fly as you received the data from the Coq system. To maintain this tool, I had to know exactly what were all the commands available in the Coq system. So I spent a lot of time learning about everything you can do in Coq. And when I reached about 1998, I started to think, because of that, I know everything about the Coq system. I was never a developer, but I had some sort of a complete view of what were all the capabilities provided by the language. I had studied it all, in a way. Well, there are probably things that but I didn't know anything about the theory. I only had a very practical experience of the Coq system. But I started to feel confident enough that I would propose people to do tutorials and things like that. So I did a tutorial for the Coq system at TP Hall in 2000. I think it was 2000. And it was in Portland, Oregon. And at the same time I was doing this Coq tutorial, Jay Moore was doing a tutorial for the ACL2 system, which I did not attend, obviously. But Jay Moore was there with a book about the ACL2 system, And Christine Paulin was there too, I believe. Or maybe she was not, but we had the conversation just later. I said, yes, obviously, Coq is a marvelous system, but what it's lacking, there's no book about it. So I went to see Christine and I told her, you have to write a book about the Coq system. She said, maybe that's a good idea, but that won't happen. None of us is going to do it. We don't have time. If you want that there is a book on this, then you have to write it on your own. And I really thought that would, I really felt bad about it, because I thought, the people who've developed the Coq system, they have a hard time publishing. They spend their time developing a big tool. And then when it comes to getting recognition, you're anonymous in a crowd. You're part of the crowd of the developers of this big system. So there are some stars that managed to get their name remembered because maybe they gave the first foundation, something like that. And then there are all these developers, and they can't get benefit for all their work. So I really felt bad about it. I thought, no, that's not fair. If I write a book about Coq, then I'm going to get credit necessarily. It's bound to happen. But I'm going to get credit for the good work that somebody else did. Well, I can talk like that, but in the end, my selfish me said, oh yeah, I'm going to write this book. But then Christine told me, yeah, but you have to be warned, somebody else is already doing that. So maybe it would be a good idea if you join the effort. So I contacted Pierre Castéran, who had already started and announced earlier that he had started. But I had the impression he had a bit slowed down. So I said, I went to him. I told him, why don't we do it together? We came up with a plan. We separated chapters between the two of us. We wrote a book with 16 chapters, and 8 of them have been written by him, and 8 of them have been written by me. And this is how, somehow my name has been attached to this Coq system, for which, the merit is not mine, but the book is there. And people remember that I wrote this book.
That's really, really nice. Well, in a sense, I understand what you're getting at, that the real beauty here is behind you, right? Like, it's from these people who put so much effort into the theory, into the implementation of this beautiful system that we have. But in the other hand, you also had to put an effort and sit down and write the book. So I think it's fair for you to take some credit.
I've had a few conversations with a few other people who've tried to write books, and they, like Jean-Christophe Filiatre, who was also one of the co-authors of the Coq system. He was very interested in formal verification of OCaml programs. He developed a system that was specific to it, which is called Y3 now. And he once told me, I have a lot of respect for those people who can devote time to writing books. It's true, it's not the same. Not everybody works in the same way, and a lot of us prefer the safety of writing regular papers because they are shorter projects. If you embark on a big project and somehow your steam runs out, then you've lost 2 years of your work. So you have to keep the steam for in our case, we kept the steam for 4 years. It took 4 years to write the book. So we started in 2000 and it was published in 2004.
Well, we are very glad that you had this team to finish it, because it's a beautiful book. Thank you so much.
There's another thing about it is, exactly in the same way as I said, we all researchers don't work the same way. Somehow, people, my friends tend to say that I like to feel guilty. So
don't we all?
But somehow, I'm admirative of people who turn out very good ideas and that are really new and things like that. I don't know if I can turn as many new ideas as other people, but I have the impression that I can reprocess ideas that have been produced before me and make them accessible to a wider community. And this is what I was trying to do in this Coq'Art book. Even though there are places, I really went very far into the theory. When I tried to explain all the basics of inductive types in the book and how it was related, how the inductive types are related to the recursive programming, how the induction principle is just the canonical example of recursive programming. The induction principle on a data type is the natural type of the base, the most general recursive function you can write on this data type.
And those are things that are very hard to find out there if you're just looking at papers. Like, nobody take the time to sit down and explain exactly, look, this is actually very simple. What you're doing is this, like to just synthesize this knowledge in a very digestible way.
So I tried, for example, to include an explanation of why you need to have this positivity rule in the definition of an inductive type by giving the example of an inductive type that would encode the pure lambda calculus if you didn't have the positivity rule. And because it's pure lambda calculus and pure lambda calculus can contain the omega term, then you would have you would be able to write a recursive function that loops forever. And so this is the kind of thing you want to avoid. I didn't invent this. I think everybody who was type theorists knew about it, but trying to find the right words to explain it was satisfactory.
To be honest, I think I have some experience teaching some Coq and everything, so I think that's kind of one of the sources that is the most puzzling for someone who's just starting in, type theory and using Coq is why does it have to be positive? Because it's not straightforward to see how this will lead to contradictions later on down the hole, right?
I had a recent discussion with Larry Paulson about this because the basic explanation of what an inductive predicate is, it's very related to the basic explanation of what an inductive type is, can be encoded in higher order logic actually. So there are things, some of the constraints of being inductive types, and there are things that I just discovered very recently. So I'm currently working on an explanation about this with Larry Paulson that is going to be published, I hope, this year or next year. Depending on what the other co-authors are going to do, because this is going to be a chapter in a book.
Wow. I am looking forward to looking into that because I've been working with inductive data types, like translating inductive data types lately, and it's very hard to find good resources.
But it happens that an inductive data type is something you can describe very simply using higher order logic. So, and I just discovered that recently, just because, as I said, I'm not a theoretician. I'm a practical guy. And so for me, an inductive type was introduced to me as a product program, a semantic specification. And then, people came with more theoretical names for the same things. And I said, oh yeah, I recognize these things. I already use them. But sometimes I have a hard time connecting the vocabulary with the things I already know.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem in our community. People rediscover the same thing over and over again and give different names, and then we have all this trouble, right?
So, I think we've spoken too much about me here.
There is one last thing then to wrap it up and move forward. We can do is how did you end up working with in the Coq Team then? So let me guess, people at the Coq Team was impressed with your work, with your book, and then they were like, yeah, you have to come and work with us and it would be really nice, and that's how you ended up there.
Well, in a way, the Coq Team it's not very, there is no strong barrier. It's not said you're in the Coq Team or you're not in the Coq Team. It was more like...
it's not excluded middle.
What are you doing? And, you have a nice idea to suggest. Like, I don't know if you know about the tool that was developed. I think it was in the middle of the 90s by Pierre Castéran. So the tool is named Omega. So it's now being replaced by LIA, which means linear integer arithmetic. And Omega was an implementation of the first phases of an algorithm that was known as the Omega test by a researcher whose name is William Pugh, I believe. Pugh. So maybe my scientific culture is lacking here, but I'm trying to give all the names. So Pierre was not part of the Coq development team. He looked at the way the Coq system was developed and he said, oh, it would be nice if we could add, we can already do a lot of arithmetic in the Coq system, but it would be nice if we could add a decision procedure for linear arithmetic. So he just embarked on it. He did it on his side and came back a few months or maybe a few years later and showed that to the Coq people. And they said, yeah, very good. We're going to integrate this in our code. So, in a sense, Pierre Castéran has become a member of the Coq development team in this way. So this is how it worked. People just, Of course, there was a sociological boundary around the people who were living and working, having regular meetings together and working in nearby offices and things like that. If you were not part of this circle, you felt a bit outside of an outsider. But in the case of Pierre, for example, he needed to have good advice in the beginning, and then he did his own project. And when the project was completed and it looked so good, people just said, yes, we're going to integrate that inside. And when they had to maintain it and they tried to understand, and if they didn't understand enough, they called Pierre for help to understand how to evolve the software with the Coq system. So this is how the Coq team was welcoming. And in my case, because I was trying to provide a user interface for the Coq system, they looked at it, they said, oh yes, there are good ideas, so we're going to try to give you some help on doing it. But also, the system was available, you had the sources, so I just had to take my own courage and go and look in the sources and say, where can I hook my own software? So in my case, because I was doing user interfaces, I wanted to understand how does the Coq system receive a string, a line of input, how does it parse it, how does it make it into a command, and where does this command go, and things like that. So I tried to understand what were there. At the time, the system had a syntax that was defined as a big YAC specification. So, I just had to look at the YAC specification and understand what was the input language. And when it stopped being a YAC specification, it was still a specification in some specific language to describe syntax, even if it was a homemade language for the Coq system, the Camel P4 specifications and things like that. So, if you want to be part of a big development like that, when you can see the sources, you just take your courage in your hands and you go and look in the sources and you try to understand how can you add your preferred functionality. And once you've done that, you go and see the authors and see if they are going to buy it. So in fact, I did that with Larry Paulson and Isabel, but it didn't pan out. Larry was not impressed enough. And for me, it was an experiment the experiment with Isabel was an experiment that helped me in my training. But because it didn't pan out, I tried to find another one where people would be more receptive to what I wanted to propose. It's not so easy for the team to be so welcoming anyway, because as soon as you are integrating pieces of code that have been developed by somebody else, then you have to worry about the future of this piece of code. What happens if there's a bug? What happens if it becomes ossified and you can't, it cannot follow the evolution of your software? This is always a problem anyway. So we see these questions occur again and again.
That's how you end up staying, because then you have to provide maintenance for your software.
Well, actually, I never produced any functionality in the Coq system that was really adopted.
Really?
So for some time, the piece of code that I was adding in the Coq sources was maintained only by me and not really used by the Coq people. So they accepted it because I was doing the maintenance. But after a while, they developed the Coq ID tool that was in competition with what I was developing, and that just pushed my work on the side. So in this sense, I was not really integrated.
How would you describe your work? Your
My role,
Yes.
it's a bit different because you have a lot of people who have produced significant chunks of the Coq system that have been reused a lot. And in my case, I don't have this impression. What I have is, for a while, I produced, for example, I think there is a command that is still in the Coq system, which is called search pattern. Well, I was the initial author of this one. But the search command itself has evolved in a way that is independent from my code. So the idea of search pattern is now superseded by the search command. So I think we still use it because there are things you can do with search pattern that you can't do with the search command. It's not even true anymore. So, search pattern is bound to finish in the trash like the rest. So for me, I still keep this ability to go and look into the code and sometimes say, oh, here there may be some bug, so maybe I can propose a correction to such a bug. I've never been afraid of looking into the code, but the more it goes, the less it's possible for me because, there's another problem with my generation is that I have to do things at other levels of research that makes that I don't have time. I don't have as much time to go into just developing extensions to the Coq system. So the other contribution that I made to the Coq system is the function command, which is a function to write generally recursive functions in an easier way than using well-founded induction. And this function command is the same. They don't like it.
Yeah, they're developing equations now, right?
Yeah, the pressure is on using equation.
Yeah.
So I tried to understand. The last contributions to the discussion was to trying to understand how to get rid of all the needs for function just to use equation. And there are places where I think function is more easier to use, but now I start to have my own tutorial to explain how to avoid using function and how to encode in equations the things that would be nicer to write in function.
So actually, I was under the impression that you would be more involved with the team, given. So when you were in DeepSpec, you gave a very nice presentation of how the team was coming up together inside Coq.
Let's go back then. In 2004, we Pierre Castéran and myself, we published this book, which is what we call the Coq'Art, which was a nice name that was chosen by Pierre. Christine was the main architect of the Coq system at that time, Christine Paulin-Morin. And she came back to me a few years later telling me, this book that you wrote, it's a game changer. There's before and after. The way people view the Coq system is completely changed by the fact that the book exists and it is so good. This is the way they said you're part of the team. What you did here is not the same as developing the Coq system. But what you did here is important. It's also important. It's not the same job, but it's important. So, so at that time I thought, yes, this is what I can contribute to a big system like Coq. I'm a good explainer. That's how I believed in myself. I start to be confident in myself was to say, yes, maybe I'm not the inventor, but I'm a good explainer. That's one thing I can provide. And anyway, in retrospect, the way I was, the other thing I was thinking about myself is that it was an important strategic move to write this book. This is what I'm good at, strategy. So you may believe it or not, but this is how I thought about myself. So let's go a few years. I think maybe Benjamin Pierce would want to disagree, but I have the impression that because there was a book then these well-known universities in the US started to teach Coq because of the existence of the book. Of course, after that, they decided they wanted to have their own material, and they went into developing the Logical Foundations book. But it made everybody comfortable to know, oh, we can go and teach this. There is good material. We can use that as foundation for our courses. So, and this happened in many places. So this is why I believe that's the reason why Christine said it's a game changer. And I also met people who said, usually when you need to learn Coq, you would need to have an expert around. So there were a lot of experts, of Coq users in Paris because the developers were there, and they could give a lot of advice. But once you had the book, I've met people who said, I was in my place in Stockholm or in some other, and I just used the book, and it was easy. We really appreciated that. So that was how somehow the Coq team said, yes, we have developers, we need to have explainers too, and here we have Pierre and Yves. So this is how I was integrated in the team, not as a developer. I can, of course, I did a little research about how to use the Coq system. I always wanted to have a practical approach to it. So I thought writing general recursive function was too hard. So this is why we ended up with my PhD student, Antonia Bala. We ended up developing this function tool that was then maintained by Julien Forest. And
so in a sense, you are the advertiser of Coq, the one who can come in and explain in a very nice way.
Yeah.
The pretty face.
So this is maybe that's the position you can take for the period between 2004 and 2008-10. So at that time, it started to be that some people around, I don't know who actually, the ACM process for deciding who is going to receive an award works by somebody has to propose that some software is going to receive an award. So in 2013, there was a meeting of a committee in the ACM organization, and they gave a software award every year that is funded by IBM, I believe, and so that year they decided that this award should be given to the Coq system. So they reached people in the Coq community and tell them, we want to give the award to the Coq developers, so you have to choose who are the people who are going to receive this award. So they decided a team in which there was Gérard Huet, who was the supervisor of the Coq development for the first 10 years. Thierry Coquin, who was the guy who basically wrote down the rules of the calculus of construction, which is the basic theoretical tenet of the Coq system, how to use dependent types to. So you have to understand that the Coq system in the year 84 is really different from the Coq system that we know today, but it's still there. It's still the foundation. Okay, and I think the Coq system is really strong as soon as you add the inductive types in it, and the inductive types was the production of Christine Paulin. So you have the three founders there.
Is she retired now? I've been reading some of her papers, and it's beautiful. She's done a lot to the Coq system.
Well, Christine Paulin she's a person with a very strong collective impact. When she knows that something has to be done for the collective, for the collective good, then she's going to do that. And she has accepted big responsibilities in universities in the Paris region. I don't know. At some point, I think she was the dean for some university,
right.
And so I think she hasn't had time.
Yeah, that will take all your time
for a few years.
Sure.
So there was these three people, and then there were a few of the developers. So Chet Murphy, who had been the main force around the change that happened in the middle of the 90s. Christophe Filiatre, who came after him. Bruno Barras, who was the big specialist of termination problems and avoiding paradoxes around termination problems. So this, I'm now at 6 people. There's a 7th one, Hugo Herbelin, who was the main architect after Christine Paulin. And then with these 7 people, they said, yeah, but Coq would not be such a success if there hadn't been the book. So we want to have Pierre and Yves also in this list.
Wow.
So this is how I end up being there. When they decided who has had a big impact in the development, in a big impact on Coq, they said all these 7 developers have had a big impact in the development of Coq, and these two book authors. This is what happened. So I went to this this award reception ceremony, and at that time I thought we need another strategic move. The next strategic move is to because right now what I see, and I already said that before, the developers of the Coq system, they are going to be crushed by the success. Their job, users of the Coq system think that the job of the Coq developers is to give them a good tool that works for sustaining their research. But developing this good tool and making sure it doesn't break is such a big task that these people, I was thinking, these people, they won't be able to do it and publish and get recognition for their research at the same time. That's not exactly true, because everybody knows that Mathieu Sozo, Pierre-Marie Pedro, and Emilio, and I'm giving all these names and I'm forgetting a few of them. This is what I didn't want to do. But for example, at the time when we chose, what I didn't do, I was not part of the discussion of who are the developers that are going to be to receive the award. They stopped at some dates. So they stopped basically at Jean-Christophe Filiatre. But there were a few people that already had done a lot of investment in the Coq system after that, and which were not named. And it may feel unfair, okay? But so I have names in mind that I think these people should get more recognition for their investment on the system.
Absolutely.
So my next step, that starting in 2014, was to say, we have to find a way to gather more funding for people who are going to work on the Coq system, but not have the insane situation where everybody wants them to develop the Coq system, but they're only evaluated on how good they do in terms of scientific visibility. And scientific visibility is not about providing a piece of software. It's about providing publications and things like that. So we have to find... it's not exactly true, because INRIA, which is the employer for most of the people who are involved in the development of Coq, accepts the idea that a beautiful piece of software is actually a huge scientific impact. So this is good. But still, if you want to go to industrial scale usability, then you need to have engineers. So this is the ideas I've been pushing for the last 6 years, trying to make sure we hire the good engineers for this, and we find funding for that. And so I'm in contact with industrial users of Coq, trying to convince them that as soon as they think it's a very useful tool for them, maybe sometimes they should consider either providing a an unrestricted gift as they do for research in universities, or taking a membership in some sort of an organization that we call a consortium, or we find different solutions to make sure that funding can be channeled to a structure that would be able to give good careers for people who are going to work exclusively on the development of the Coq system and making sure it gets to this industrial scale usability.
So one thing that is very clear for me throughout our conversation is that you believe in Coq. Why is that? What makes you believe so much in the Coq system? Why do you think it's such a nice tool?
I don't believe that much, actually. I have doubts. Sometimes you get to a situation where I think it's a risky endeavor, but it's really worth doing. I think we have a very good basis, and I believe in this basis. And then what I think is there are a few things that are risky, and I want to see them. I still want to try them because it's my job as a researcher to try risky things. So, where is the risk?
So why do you believe in the foundation then? What's this foundation?
So I believe in the foundation. The foundation of Coq is good, and it's not the only system who wants to work on this foundation. Type theory as a foundation is behind Agda, behind Coq, behind Lean. And actually, Lean is very close to Coq in terms of the kind of type theory it uses. So this is good. The next thing is, and for this I've been influenced by a book that I read 5 years ago by a journalist who's called, I'm afraid I may not remember his name correctly. It's either Stephen Johnson or John Stevenson, and the title of the book is Progress. And this guy was studying, what is happening nicely today in the new society, and he was saying, at some point, numbers trump competence. That is, if you manage to get many people working on a given endeavor, on a given objective, then this is going to be better than a tool that would be developed by a single genius. And actually, this person was citing France at some places by saying France has a tradition of centralized planning, and because of that, it missed a few opportunities. And what happens with the Coq system right now is that the number of developers is big by comparison with other proof systems. So this is at the same time a strength in the sense that number is if you have more people trying to have good ideas about a system, then more good ideas are going to be produced. This is the strength, and the weakness is if all these people don't pull in the same direction, then you're going to go to end up in a stalemate. So we have this risk, but I still think, we have to try to collect all this goodwill together and see if we can make it go further. And I think all these guys are doing a good job of it. The organization of the development of the Coq system now is made in such a way that you don't feel an outsider anymore if your office is not in the right corridor. There's a procedure for proposing improvements to the Coq system, for having these improvements being discussed, and then you have pull requests, and there's a quality control that is organized on a community basis. There are even people who think that their main job is to make this work. More than producing new pieces of code for the Coq system, their main job is to make sure that the collective effort is productive. And I think this is great.
They have Zulip, which everyone is super active over there. Coq Club. There's the Discourse as well.
You have Zulip. You have all the pull requests are being tested automatically in nightly build. It's not nightly builds. It's automatically with continuous integration. The whole infrastructure is trying to absorb all the nice ideas for large open source development. So all this, I don't have any role in it. I'm just trying to make sure that I go and knock at the doors of INRIA or sometimes of other industrial partners, and I say, can we add something? Because this is working well. Can we add some more energy into it? Some more funding, some more people. So this is my role right now. I don't have a much better role than that. And I think if I was not doing it, it would not be too serious. I'm just trying to push up my little stone to the whole building. But if I was not doing it, I think people would still see that it's a good job. It's a good project, and maybe it would be a little slower, but it would still work. So this is why I believe in it. I think sometimes open source development on a voluntary basis, there's all kind of ways in which it can have friction, and sometimes people get too emotional about their own contribution and things like that. So we need to iron a few things once in a while. But aside from that, the fact that it is a collective piece of work, this is quite exciting.
How do you see Coq going into the future? Do you think it's still gonna getting bigger and bigger and getting more and more contribution from outside and getting even more usage from the bigger industry or the bigger or more academics using? How do you see Coq being going forth in the future? Because Coq has been around for quite a while, more than 20 years, almost 30 years now, right?
Well, it's more than 30 actually, but so you don't have the right scale. The first paper about calculus of constructions, it was in 1984.
Wow.
So
yep.
So you can put more than 30 in your sentence. So there are a few things that I would like to say about this. Coq itself, it's a bit like this Star Trek movie. Where they meet some machine that's called V'ger, which is trying to swallow all the universe. And so Coq itself, it's an ecosystem. This ecosystem contains a few projects that are actually maintained as a different entity by different groups of people. So, for example, you look at the work on floating point numbers. You have a library that's called Flock. The fact that Flock works or doesn't work is mainly the job of a subgroup, which has a non-empty intersection with the Coq developers, but in some way it's a different project. And now, if you look at Coq'Art is a huge asset in terms of the success of the Coq system. People are going to go and use Coq because they want to use Coq'Art. And sometimes they don't want to use Coq'Art. They only want to use part of Coq'Art. Coq'Art is a mine of information for people interested in semantics of programming language, especially for C-like languages or for the C language itself. Okay? So, but Coq'Art itself, it's a project by a person who is going to probably attract more people around them, but it's a project in its own. So this is what my film, what I see in the future is more like a galaxy system. It's Coq itself will survive if it can get in a situation where it doesn't have to take care of all the planets around, or all the stars around, actually. If you go and look at all the effort around Iris, this is fantastic. But the Iris developers, they have conversations, very, very good at positive conversations with the Coq developers, but they understand each other as being two separate groups. Okay, so this is what I think. The Coq system should somehow try to stay on the small side, and this is what they do. Well, actually, maybe you should not view this as my opinion. It's what I see when I look at them working. You know, for example, at some point we had a beautiful result in 2004 about people who were able to check that numbers with 10,000 digits were prime. So you were able to do all this computation inside the Coq system. To do that, there was a library of big numbers that had been added to the Coq system. And even though you were using pure functional programming on these big numbers, there was a way to make it be fast enough that you would be able to work on fast enough and use tree-like structures for big numbers that make it possible to do all this computation. Well, this big num library is something that the Coq developers maintained for a long time, and now it's not. You know, there's this effort to make sure that it's not the responsibility of the Coq developers anymore. Some other people can be invited on just taking care of that. So this is, you know, this effort about the Coq community site is exactly this. You know, the Coq system somehow should not collapse under the weight of all these things. The developers have to stay on. So at some point, if you add something to the Coq system and you say, well, it's in there, and but then then at some point you provide a name to the thing and you remove it from the Coq system, and you say it's still part of the ecosystem, but you want to attract a wider community to maintain this. This is what Coq community is doing. So this is, you know, the Coq system should still be only the programming language. So there are things that are considered part of the Coq system standard library right now, and which in the future are going to be removed. I think the description of the real numbers is going to go that way. For example.
So trying to get a standard library as small as possible and having just the core of Coq to take care of everything, right?
I'm not completely well, for the standard library, I don't know what exactly it should contain, but there's a discussion about it. This is currently something that people want to discuss. Because if you look at it seriously, a lot of people are dissatisfied with the current state of the standard library, and so you have a proliferation of standard libraries. You have STDPP, you have... It's normal. I think at some point we need to stabilize a standard library that everybody agrees on. But right now, the fact that it was part of the Coq system, but the Coq developers really don't have time to look at it enough. So it's you know, the expression it could do with some more love. And I think if it was removed from the responsibility of the Coq developers, then this could happen. You know, you want to organize a better discussion around this. And right now, the solution is people who are dissatisfied, they just go and develop their own side library. So, you know, the MathComp library, for example, looks like that. It's an alternative to the standard library.
That is very nice, actually. It's a very good idea because Coq is already a little beast. Has a lot of it's pretty big, feels pretty big already.
So it's still a problem, you know. It's another issue. I think it's still a problem that there would be proliferation of libraries for a variety of topics. This is a problem because when a newcomer comes, sometimes they will just choose to work with a library that is not maintained. Because at the time they read for the documentation, it looks like it is the best one, but in fact there is a wrong reason. So this is something for which we still need to understand how to do that well. Make sure that people are actually guided to the place where they're going to receive the most help.
Yes, that's definitely, as you said at the beginning, putting industry level effort into the developing part, right? Like making sure that we get engineering correct and how all of these moving parts go together.
I had another metaphor that I was using. Well, it's not exactly a metaphor. It was more like a correspondence. If you look at the success of the Java programming language, Java was a big success at some point.
Success. Yes.
Everybody was going to work with Java. I think the success of Java was in part, but only in small part, due to the fact that it was portable. And so that was the Java virtual machine. And in a huge part, the success came from the fact that it had a very beautiful library in which you could find everything you wanted to do. And I think this is one of the things we have to be careful for the Coq system. We have to make sure we get to a situation where the library is a huge asset for the Coq system. It's already somehow the case, if you think about the Coq'Art effort or the Iris effort. A lot of people who want to do research on, like Tej Chahed was telling me one day, all the good things he was thinking about the Iris tool. And because he wants to do his research in systems, and having a tool like Iris makes it possible. So we have to make sure that all these things exist. And if you look at the success of Isabelle, it's similar. The success of Isabelle comes from the fact
they have a huge library and that's very well archived.
You have a beautiful library of results that are maintained, and this is something that should happen in the Coq system. But the idea of the Coq development team of Theo Zimmermann, I think of him, for example, that we should organize the community, help the community, the ecosystem, all the users, we should help them to organize themselves in such a way that the library can improve by a collective effort. This is where we should be going.
I hate to interrupt you here, but we are more than 1 hour in,
yeah, I know.
So we should wrap it up. Is there anything else you want to bring up?
No.
So I actually have one thing that I would like to bring up. In the middle of the conversation, we mentioned that it would be very important for industry partners that are interested, to raise interest around the Coq and to become some sort of partner or to donate some sort of money. Where they can find more information about that? Who should they contact if someone of them are happening to be listening to this episode?
You should contact me.
So just send you an email. Hey, I want to be part, I want to contribute somehow. What should I do?
The two persons who are really on the front for this me and Maxime Denes.
So there you go. If you want to contribute to the Coq community and make sure that Coq is receiving the love it needs money, it needs people. So please contact Yves Bertot.
The point I have on this is that at some point, some people in industries are going to use Coq in such a way that it becomes crucial for their competitiveness that Coq continues to exist. If that's the case, then you have to, you're not paying a license because it's open source, but somehow there is a cost in it, and the failure of existence of this open source community would be a huge cost for the company. So if you get to this point, then at this time, you should really think that it's your responsibility to make sure that this open source software continues to exist.
Huge responsibility.
So, of course, it's a responsibility that you're going to share with all the stakeholders. So you should participate in it. I think it's the same way that Linux gets support or Apache gets support. It's for the same reason. People discover that it's in their interest that this software exists.
So there you go. If you want to make sure it will continue existing, please make sure to donate and contribute somehow. Yves, thank you so much for being my guest today. It was an amazing conversation. We went through so much. We learned so much. You are an amazing person.
I think I will be ashamed of hearing more about this interview, but I spoke way too much about myself.
You are too humble, Yves. I invite people here. The main reason why I want to make this show is to make our community more personal, make it feel like we are people, you know, like we're not just paper, not just ideas. There are people around behind them, right? So thank you so much for being part of it. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. It is always nice to have a good historical perspective of where things came from and how we got where we are. And I think Yves did a great job on giving a detailed explanation on the motivation behind Coq'Art, how the Coq community has been working around the two, and how an outsider can contribute to the project. He also does a great job on giving proper credit where it is due. It was a great conversation. You can find all the papers mentioned in this episode in the description. I've also left his contact information over there. Questions and comments are always welcome in our website, www.typetheoryforall.com. If you like this episode, make sure to share with a friend. I am confident they will love you for it. And I will see you guys in the next time.